the south of Greece, in the Evros River Valley, amidst the rugged Taygetos and Parnon mountains, arose a state that for centuries inspired both admiration and terror. Sparta was unlike any other Greek polis. Here, no majestic marble temples were built, no philosophical schools were established, and no love poems were written. The Spartans chose a different path, the path of the warrior, the path of absolute obedience to the state, a path that transformed them into the most formidable military force of the ancient world. But how did this astonishing society emerge? What events compelled an entire people to renounce common human joys for a single, supreme goal, military superiority? The story of Sparta began not with triumph, but with invasion. Around the 10th century BCE, the Dorian tribes descended from the northern Peloponnese peninsula. These were hardy warriors who spoke an archaic dialect of the Greek language. They arrived in Laconia, a fertile region in the Peloponnese, and found Achaean settlements there, remnants of the once mighty Mycenaean civilization. The Dorians did not seek peaceful coexistence. They seized lands, enslaved the local population, and destroyed old orders. It was these newcomers who founded the settlement that would later be called Sparta. The initial Sparta consisted of several scattered villages, located on the banks of the Eurotas River. Archaeologists find no traces of powerful fortifications from that period here. The Dorians relied not on walls, but on their own strength and military valor. Gradually, these settlements merged into a single polis, but the city remained modest. No monumental buildings, no ostentatious luxury. Houses were built of unfired brick and wood. Streets were narrow and unpaved. Spartans disdained ornamentation. What mattered more to them was something else: the land that could be cultivated, and the people who would do the cultivating. The conquest of Laconia was accompanied by brutality. The local Achaean population was enslaved and turned into helots, state-owned slaves. The helots worked the Spartans' land, giving them a significant portion of the harvest. They had no rights. They could be killed without trial or investigation. There was even a special custom, the crypteia, secret night raids by young Spartans against the helots. The youths were ordered to hunt down and kill the strongest and bravest helots to prevent possible uprisings. This barbaric custom served two purposes simultaneously: to keep the helots in constant fear, and to harden young warriors, accustoming them to killing. However, not all the conquered population became helots. A portion of the inhabitants of the surrounding areas gained the status of perioikoi, free but not fully privileged residents of Sparta. The perioikoi engaged in crafts and trade, which Spartans disdained. They lived in their own settlements, paid taxes, and served in the army, but had no political rights. The perioikoi were a buffer between the Spartans and the helots. They supported the state's economy, allowing full citizens to dedicate themselves entirely to military affairs. The Spartans themselves called themselves Spartiates. This was a military aristocracy, an elite that held in subjection a vast mass of dependent population. According to various estimates, for every Spartiate, there were from 7 to 10 helots. Such a numerical imbalance created a constant threat of rebellion. The Spartans lived in a besieged fortress, where the enemy was not outside the walls but within, working the fields, in homes, everywhere. It was this fear of the helots that became one of the main reasons for the formation of Sparta's unique system of upbringing and state organization. In the 6th century BCE, Sparta faced a serious crisis. There was not enough land in Laconia for the growing population of Spartiates. Other Greek polis solved this problem by founding colonies in the Mediterranean, but the Spartans chose a different path. They turned their gaze westward, to the fertile region of Messenia, located on the other side of the Taygetos mountain range. Messenia was famous for its wheat fields and olive groves. Its lands could feed thousands of warriors, and Sparta decided to take them by force. The First Messenian War began around 730 BCE and lasted for almost 20 years. It was a bloody and brutal war. The Messenians desperately defended their homeland, using the mountainous terrain for guerrilla actions. The Spartans lacked experience in prolonged sieges and protracted campaigns. The war demanded an unprecedented strain on their forces, but in the end, the numerical superiority and discipline of the Spartan phalanx prevailed. Messenia was conquered. Its population, like the Achaeans of Laconia before them, was reduced to helotage. The lands were divided among the Spartiates. Each full citizen received a plot of land called a kleros, which was worked by helots. Victory in the First Messenian War doubled Sparta's territory and increased the number of helots. Now the Spartiates could live off the labor of others, without worrying about sustenance. This freed them for constant military training. But the victory had a dark side. The subjugated Messenians did not reconcile themselves to slavery. They remembered freedom, their own land, and their dignity, and this memory became the seed of a future rebellion that would shake Sparta to its foundations. It was in this troubled time, between the two Messenian Wars, that events occurred in Sparta that changed the entire way of life of the polis. Tradition attributes these reforms to the legendary legislator Lycurgus. Modern historians debate whether Lycurgus actually existed, or if he is a composite figure representing several reformers. However, the ancient Spartans did not doubt his reality. They believed that Lycurgus received his laws from Apollo himself in Delphi and established the order that Sparta followed for centuries. According to legend, Lycurgus was a member of the royal family. After his brother's death, he could have become king, but renounced power in favor of his young nephew. To avoid suspicion of desiring the throne, Lycurgus set off on a journey. He visited Crete, where he studied the laws of ancient cities, spent time in Ionia, and became acquainted with the poetry of Homer. Some sources claim he even reached Egypt and India. Upon returning to Sparta, Lycurgus found the city in a state of chaos. The rich and the poor were at odds. Royal power was weakening, and the populace was grumbling. Sparta stood on the brink of civil war. Lycurgus decided to act radically. He went to Delphi, the sacred center of the Greek world, where Apollo's oracle was located. There he received God's blessing for his reforms. Returning, Lycurgus announced that he would bring new laws but first demanded an oath from the Spartans not to change these laws until his return. The citizens, kings, and the council of elders all swore. After this, Lycurgus proclaimed his laws, known as the Great Retra. These decrees were concise, categorical, and allowed no ambiguity. They defined the structure of power, the rights and duties of citizens, and the principles of upbringing and daily life. The first principle of the new system was the equality of Spartiates. Lycurgus did not tolerate excessive wealth or poverty among full citizens. He carried out a redistribution of land, dividing it into equal plots among the Spartiates. Each received a kleros sufficient to support a family. Selling or gifting this land was forbidden. It was passed down from father to son. The helots attached to the kleros worked the land and gave the owner a set share of the harvest. A Spartiate could not demand more than what was prescribed. This measure prevented the accumulation of wealth in one hand and the impoverishment of other citizens. Lycurgus prohibited the use of gold and silver coins. Instead, iron bars were introduced in Sparta, specially treated with vinegar to make the metal brittle and useless. These coins were cumbersome and had no value outside of Laconia. The reform of the monetary system pursued several goals. It made the accumulation of wealth pointless. It hindered trade with other polis, which could bring foreign luxury and corrupting morals to Sparta. It also made corruption impossible. Who could be bribed with iron bars? Spartans took pride in their poverty. Simplicity of life was considered a virtue, and the pursuit of luxury a shame. Lycurgus established a new system of meals, syssitia, communal meals. All Spartiates, from kings to ordinary soldiers, had to eat together in special dining halls. Each contributed a certain share of products: barley flour, wine, cheese, figs, and a little money for meat and fish. The food was simple and meager. The main dish was considered to be black broth, made from pork blood, vinegar, and salt. Foreigners who tasted this dish shuddered with disgust, but Spartans ate it with pleasure, believing that luxurious food softened a warrior. He who could not contribute his share to the syssitia lost his status as a Spartiate. Communal meals strengthened equality and comradeship. They resembled a military camp, where all soldiers were equal in the face of danger. The political structure established by Lycurgus was complex and balanced. At the head of the state were two kings from different dynasties, the Agiads and the Eurypontids. Dual kingship was a unique feature of Sparta. The kings commanded the army on campaigns, performed sacrifices, and presided over the council, but their power was limited. Real governance was carried out by the Council of Elders, the Gerousia, composed of 28 members, all over 60 years old, and the two kings. The Gerousia prepared draft laws, judged major cases, and oversaw the kings. The highest organ of power was considered the popular assembly, the Apella, in which all Spartiates over 30 years old participated. The assembly adopted laws, elected officials, and decided matters of war and peace. However, voting was done by shouting without counting votes, and the result was determined by officials by ear. A special role was played by the College of Ephors, 5 elected magistrates who monitored compliance with the laws. The Ephors were elected for a term of 1 year and possessed immense power. They could even judge kings, fine them for violations, and remove them from army command. Every month, the kings and Ephors exchanged oaths. The kings swore to rule according to the laws. The Ephors swore to uphold royal power as long as it followed the laws. This system of checks and balances prevented the establishment of tyranny and ensured the stability of the state for centuries. After proclaiming his laws and ensuring that the Spartans began to follow them, Lycurgus announced that he was again setting off for Delphi to receive Apollo's final instruction. He reminded his fellow citizens of their oath not to change the laws until his return and disappeared forever. According to one version, he starved himself to death so that the Spartans could not be freed from their oath. According to another, he lived out the rest of his life in exile. In any case, Lycurgus never returned to Sparta, and his laws, consecrated by oath and divine authority, remained unchanged for centuries. The Spartans believed that deviation from Lycurgus's decrees would bring ruin to the state. Lycurgus's laws covered all aspects of a Spartan's life, but the most astonishing was the system of upbringing. The agoge transformed boys into ruthless warriors, ready to die for Sparta, and knowing no life other than military service. The agoge began at birth. When a child was born into a Spartiate family, it was not the father who decided whether it would live or die. The infant was brought before the elders, who examined it. If the child was strong and healthy, it was allowed to live. A weak or deformed child was taken to the Peloponnesian gorge on the slopes of Taygetos and thrown into the abyss. Sparta could not afford to feed those who would not become warriors. Until the age of 7, boys lived at home with their mothers. But even in these years, their upbringing was characterized by harshness. Spartan mothers did not spoil their children. Infants were not swaddled tightly, allowing them to move freely and strengthen their bodies. They were not afraid to leave them in the dark, accustoming them to fearlessness. They were fed simple food without delicacies. A crying child was not comforted. A Spartan had to learn from childhood to endure pain and hardship in silence. Greeks from other poleis specifically hired Spartan wet nurses, who were renowned for their ability to raise strong and obedient children. At the age of 7, the real agoge began. Boys were taken from their families and united into detachments, called agala. From then on, the state became their family, and their comrades, their brothers. At the head of each agle stood a paedonomos, an instructor from among the best adult Spartiates. He had unlimited authority over the boys and could punish them for the slightest transgression. The children were shaved bald, dressed in a single coarse cloak, the himation, which served as both clothing and bedding. Footwear was not provided. The boys walked barefoot year-round, toughening their feet on stony roads and prickly bushes. They slept on reeds that they tore with their bare hands on the banks of the Eurotas. The main occupation was warfare. Boys were taught to wield a spear and sword, move in phalanx formation, and obey commands instantly and without question. The training was exhausting. Spartans did not tolerate leniency for weakness. Those who fell behind became objects of ridicule and beatings. Physical punishment was common. Boys were beaten not only by their instructors, but by any adult Spartiate who noticed a transgression. The Ephors even ordered some capable youths to intentionally appear unkempt and clumsy to toughen their character through humiliation. Literacy was taught minimally. Spartans considered reading and writing necessary only for practical purposes. Philosophy, poetry, and rhetoric were disdained as useless and dangerous pursuits that could distract from military matters. However, great attention was paid to music and singing. Spartans sang war songs while marching in formation. The music of the flute accompanied them in battle. It was believed that rhythm and melody strengthened discipline and unity in the phalanx. Boys were taught laconic speech, concise, precise, and witty. The word laconic comes from the name of the region, Laconia. Spartans prided themselves on their ability to express deep thoughts in few words. Food was given sparingly, intentionally, so that the boys would learn to obtain it themselves. Stealing food was not only permitted but encouraged. However, a caught thief was severely beaten, not for theft, but for clumsiness. Spartan morality did not condemn deceiving the enemy, secrecy, or cunning. These qualities would be useful in war. One famous story tells of a boy who stole a fox cub. Hiding the animal under his himation, he met his instructor. During the conversation, the fox began to gnaw at the boy's stomach. The young Spartan continued the conversation, showing no sign of pain, until the fox gnawed through the abdominal wall. The boy died, but did not betray himself. This story, whether true or not, embodies the Spartan ideal, endurance above life. At the age of 12, the severity of the agoge increased. Boys were no longer given himatians. From then on, they had to make do with a single cloak year-round. In winter, the temperature in the mountains of Laconia dropped below zero, but the Spartans hardened themselves, endured the cold, and learned to warm themselves through movement and mutual support. They were forced to participate in brutal contests. The most famous was the whipping at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Youths were tied up and beaten with whips, sometimes to death. Spectators gathered to see who could endure the pain in silence, without a moan. He who cried out or wept brought shame upon himself and his adula. At 18, a young man became an iron, an assistant instructor. Now he himself had to train younger boys, punish them, and maintain discipline. Irons gained more freedom, but also more responsibility. They organized the cryptoi, secret expeditions against the helots. A youth would receive a short sword and a little food, after which he would set off into the countryside. During the day he hid, and at night he would go out onto the roads and kill helots he encountered. The cryptoi served two purposes: to keep the helots in fear, and to accustom young Spartans to killing without hesitation. He who successfully completed the cryptoi was considered ready for real war. At the age of 20, a young Spartan became a full-fledged warrior. He received a set of heavy armament, a hoplite shield, a spear, a sword, a helmet, and armor. From then on, he lived in barracks with his comrades, participated in syssitia, and trained daily. Formally, he was allowed to marry, but could not live with his wife until the age of 30. Spartans spent their days and nights together, strengthening the brotherhood that made their phalanx invincible. Only at the age of 30 did a Spartiate receive full citizenship rights, could participate in the popular assembly, and move into his own home. However, military service continued until the age of 60. Unlike other Greek polis, where women lived in seclusion, Spartan women were granted unusual freedom. Spartan women did not sit at home at the loom, nor did they hide from prying eyes. They walked around the city openly, conversed with men, and participated in festivals and contests. This freedom was not a recognition of gender equality, but a necessity. Spartan men were constantly at war or in military camps. The management of the household, raising children until the age of 7, and controlling the helots all fell on the shoulders of women. Sparta needed strong, decisive, fearless women capable of bearing healthy warriors. Girls in Sparta were raised almost as strictly as boys. They were not taken from their families, but subjected to physical training. Spartan women engaged in running, discus and javelin throwing, and wrestling. They participated in sports contests naked or in short tunics, which shocked Greeks from other polis. Athenians considered it shamelessness, but Spartans believed that physical exercise strengthened a woman's body and helped her bear strong children. A weak, pampered woman would give birth to a weak child. A strong, hardened woman would give life to a future warrior. Therefore, Spartan women ran, jumped, and trained on par with men. Marriage in Sparta was unusual. Marriages were not arranged by families, but by the young people themselves. The groom would abduct the bride, of course, with her consent, and bring her to a comrade's house. There, the woman would cut her hair, put on men's clothing, and wait. The groom would come secretly at night and spend a short time with her, after which he would return to the barracks. This continued for months, sometimes years. Children were born, but husband and wife almost never lived together. This strange custom was explained in various ways. Perhaps it was a relic of ancient rituals. Perhaps the Spartans believed that rare meetings intensified passion and contributed to the conception of healthy children. Spartan women were renowned for their sharpness and directness of speech. They did not hesitate to express their opinions, even if they were harsh. Numerous sayings of Spartan women have been preserved, demonstrating their stern character. When a son complained to his mother about a short sword, she replied, "Add a step forward to it." Another mother, seeing her son off to war, handed him his shield with the words, "With it, or on it," meaning, "Return victorious or die, but do not disgrace yourself by fleeing." Spartan women disdained cowardice. When one mother learned that her son had fled the battlefield, she killed him herself, saying he was not worthy to be called a Spartan. Children in Sparta were raised, not for their parents, but for the state. The bond between mother and child was not encouraged. Excessive tenderness was considered weakness. Spartan women were expected to be ready to sacrifice their sons for the polis. A well-known story tells of a woman who, upon learning of the death of 5 sons in a single battle, asked only, "Did we win?" Upon hearing an affirmative answer, she went to the temple to thank the gods. Such inhuman steadfastness shocked other Greeks, but the Spartans saw in it the highest virtue. Spartan women enjoyed property rights that were unthinkable for women in other polis. They could own land inherited from their father or husband. Since men often died in wars, a significant portion of land in Sparta ended up in the hands of women. According to some estimates, by the 3rd century BCE, women owned up to 2/5 of all land in Laconia. This gave them immense influence and power. Spartan women could dictate terms for their husbands, choose husbands, and manage property as they saw fit. In Sparta, polyandry was permitted, a practice where a woman could have several husbands simultaneously if they were brothers or close friends. This was done to increase the birth rate. Sparta constantly lost warriors in wars, and the population of Spartiates was declining. The state encouraged childbirth by any means. If an elderly husband was unable to have children, he could invite a young man to his wife so that she could bear a child. Children born in such unions were considered legitimate. Jealousy was disdained. What mattered was not the feeling of ownership, but the good of the state, the replenishment of the ranks of warriors. Despite the austerity of life, Spartan women were educated to a degree unknown to many Greek women. They knew music and poetry, participated in religious rites, and sang choral songs at festivals. Sparta revered several female deities, including Artemis and Helen, whose cult was particularly strong. Women played an important role in the religious life of the polis, conducting rituals and sacrifices. Foreigners visiting Sparta were struck by the confidence and independence of Spartan women. Aristotle criticized this order, arguing that excessive freedom for women weakened the state. But the Spartans did not listen to such reproaches. Their system had worked for centuries, and they saw no reason to change it. In general, the position of women in Sparta was paradoxical. On the one hand, they enjoyed freedoms unavailable to women in other polis. On the other hand, these freedoms existed not for their own sake, but for the sake of the state. A woman was an incubator for warriors, a keeper of the home in the absence of men, and a manager of property. She was valued not as an individual, but as a function. But within the framework of this function, Spartan women possessed a strength and influence that many men in other cities could envy. The conquered Messenia had not forgotten freedom, and the helots of Messenian origin were particularly rebellious. They remembered that in their grandfathers' lifetimes, this land was their own. They were not born slaves, like the helots of Laconia, whose ancestors had been enslaved several centuries earlier. The Messenian helots preserved the legends of past greatness, of their cities and heroes, and they waited for an opportunity to revolt. Around 660 BCE, the opportunity presented itself. The exact reasons for the rebellion remain unclear. Perhaps the Spartans intensified their oppression, demanding more food for the growing population of Spartiates. Perhaps a specific act of cruelty tipped the scales of patience. Regardless, the Helots and Messenians rose up in rebellion, which escalated into the Second Messenian War. This was not an ordinary war between states, but a desperate struggle of slaves for freedom against one of the most formidable military machines of the ancient world. The rebellion was led by Aristomenes, a Messenian hero whose name the Spartans uttered with hatred and the Messenians with reverence. He was a brave warrior, a talented commander, and an inspiration to his people. Aristomenes did not seek open battle with the invincible Spartan phalanx. Instead, he waged a guerrilla war, using knowledge of the terrain, sudden attacks, and ambushes. Messenian detachments attacked Spartan garrisons, burned crops, and freed prisoners. Aristomenes thrice carried out daring raids into Sparta itself, penetrating the city at night and leaving signs of his presence in the most guarded places. The Spartans could not cope with this war by conventional means. Their heavy phalanx was useless against scattered guerrilla detachments. The Messenians took refuge in the mountain fortress of Ira, an impregnable natural citadel surrounded by cliffs and gorges. The Spartans besieged Ira, but could not take it by storm. The siege lasted for years. The Messenians made sorties, attacked the besiegers, and obtained provisions. Aristomenes became a legend. They told that the gods protected him, that he was invulnerable to weapons, that the very land of Messenia helped him. The war exhausted Sparta. Constant mobilization detached Spartiates from training, undermined the economy based on helot labor. Other helots throughout Laconia watched the Messenian rebellion with hope. If the Messenians won, the rebellion would spread everywhere, and Sparta would fall. The Spartan authorities understood this. Defeat was impossible. At all costs, the Messenians had to be crushed. Sparta turned for help to the Oracle of Delphi. The Pythia advised them to invite the Athenian poet and commander Tyrtaeus. The Spartans obeyed, although Tyrtaeus was not a warrior in the Spartan sense. He was a lame schoolteacher. But the oracle was not mistaken. Tyrtaeus turned out to be exactly what Sparta needed. He began to compose war elegies, songs glorifying valor and contempt for death. His poems were sung by Spartan warriors and marching in formation. Tyrtaeus's words filled them with courage, reminded them of their duty to the polis and the honor of dying for Sparta, a beautiful death for a warrior in battle. At the forefront of the ranks, for the fatherland, sang Tyrtaeus. Shameful to flee, abandoning your shield. Shameful to beg for alms in a foreign city, an exile for cowardice. His poems did not call for cruelty or hatred. They spoke of duty, loyalty to comrades, and the fact that death in battle was the highest glory. Spartans, raised by the agoge, easily accepted this message. Tyrtaeus's songs became part of Spartan culture for centuries. They were sung before battle, learned by heart in the agilae, and their words were carved on monuments to the fallen. Gradually, the Spartans gained the upper hand. They improved their phalanx, making it more disciplined and flexible. They blocked all paths to Ira, cutting off the Messenians from provisions. Hunger did its destructive work. Aristomenes made desperate sorties, trying to break the blockade, but the Spartans held firm. Finally, according to one version, a traitor showed the Spartans a secret path around Thermopylae. According to another version, the Messenians simply ran out of strength. Ira fell, and Aristomenes fled. The Spartans pursued him, but could not catch him. According to legend, he reached Rhodes and died there. Other sources claim he hid in Arcadia. In any case, Aristomenes evaded capture, and his name remained a symbol of resistance. The Messenians who survived the war were enslaved again. Many were executed. Many were sold into slavery outside Laconia. Messenia once again became a land of helots working for Spartan masters. The Second Messenian War had enormous consequences for Sparta. It revealed the fragility of a system based on helot labor. The helots outnumbered the Spartiates, and every rebellion threatened the very existence of the polis. The Spartans understood that security required constant military readiness. They could not afford to relax, could not be distracted by art, trade, or philosophy. Only the army, only discipline, only strength could keep the helots in obedience. This paranoia turned Sparta into what it became, a military camp where all life was subordinate to one goal: readiness for war and suppression of internal enemies. By the mid-6th century BCE, Sparta was the strongest state in the Peloponnese. Having conquered Laconia and Messenia, the Spartans turned their gaze to neighboring regions. However, their expansionist policy changed. Previous experience showed that conquering new territories created more problems than benefits. Helot rebellions demanded constant strain. Instead of direct conquest, Sparta began to create alliances, where it played the role of hegemon, the leader, but not the direct ruler. The Spartans intervened in conflicts between the polis of Arcadia, Elis, and Corinth. They acted as arbiters, protectors of the weak, and opponents of tyrants. In that era, tyrants, single rulers supported by the populace against the aristocracy, came to power in many Greek cities. Sparta hated tyranny. The Spartan system was oligarchic. Power belonged to a narrow circle of full citizens. Tyrants threatened this order. The Spartans overthrew tyrants wherever their hand could reach, restoring oligarchic regimes friendly to Sparta. Thus, the Peloponnesian League arose, an alliance of states under Sparta's leadership. Formally, all members of the league were equal. But in practice, Sparta made key decisions. The allies pledged to help each other in case of war, not to conclude separate peace treaties with the enemy, and to support Sparta in its foreign policy. In return, Sparta provided protection against external threats and internal unrest. This league made Sparta the dominant force in Greece for almost 2 centuries. The reputation of Spartan warriors grew, and their phalanx was considered invincible. Spartiates trained their whole lives. Their discipline was legendary. In battle, they moved in strict order, not breaking formation even under a hail of arrows and spears. Other Greeks admired and feared the Spartans simultaneously. During wars, Polius often preferred to surrender or conclude peace, rather than fight the Spartan army in open battle. The Spartan warrior became a symbol of perfection and terror. However, not everything went smoothly. Around 544 BCE, Sparta attempted to intervene in Athenian affairs, seeking to overthrow the tyrant Hippias, son of Pisistratus. The first attempt failed. A detachment of Spartans fell into an ambush and was defeated. The second expedition, led by King Cleomenes I, was successful. Hippias was expelled. Democracy was established in Athens, but soon, relations between Sparta and Athens deteriorated. The Athenians, freed from tyranny, began to pursue an independent policy that did not always coincide with Sparta's interests. Cleomenes I was one of the most controversial Spartan kings. He was intelligent, ruthless, and ambitious. Cleomenes interfered in the politics of other polius, bribed oracles, and made secret deals. Once, he even attempted to seize power in Sparta itself, overthrowing his co-ruler Demaratus. Cleomenes's intrigues were revealed, and he was forced to flee. He later returned, but his mental health deteriorated. Cleomenes died under mysterious circumstances, officially by suicide, but many suspected he was killed by the ephors, who feared his growing influence. In the early 5th century BCE, the world faced a new threat. The Persian Empire, the greatest power of that era, turned its gaze towards Greece. The Persian king Darius I demanded submission from the Greek poleis. Many small cities obeyed, but Athens and Sparta refused. The ambassadors of Darius, who arrived in Sparta with demands for land and water, symbols of submission, were thrown into a well. The Spartans said, "There you will find both land and water." This was an act of war. In 496 BCE, the Persians began their invasion. They landed in Attica, near the city of Marathon. The Athenians sent a messenger to Sparta, asking for help. The Spartans agreed, but cited a religious law prohibiting the commencement of a campaign before the full moon. The Athenians had to fight alone. They achieved a great victory at Marathon, defeating the Persian army. The Spartans arrived too late. After the battle, they inspected the battlefield, praised the Athenians for their bravery, and returned home. This delay gave rise to suspicions that Sparta had deliberately delayed, hoping that the Athenians and Persians would weaken each other. Marathon became a symbol of Athenian greatness, but the Persian threat did not disappear. Darius was preparing for a new invasion, but he died. His son Xerxes decided to complete his father's work. He gathered a huge army, estimated by some to be several 100,000 men, and in 480 BCE marched on Greece. Xerxes' invasion found Greece divided. The polius did not trust each other. Old grievances hindered unity. But the threat was so great that most polius agreed to put aside their disputes. A pan-Hellenic alliance was formed, headed by Sparta. Its military authority was indisputable. Even Athens, a rival of Sparta, recognized its leadership on land. The Greeks decided to stop the Persians in the north at the pass of Thermopylae, a narrow defile between the mountains and the sea. This was an ideal place for defense. The narrow pass did not allow the Persians to use their numerical superiority. The phalanx could hold there for a long time. Command of the detachment was entrusted to the Spartan king Leonidas. He selected 300 Spartiates, the flower of the Spartan army. In addition to them, several thousand warriors from other polius joined the detachment: Boeotians, Phocians, Thespians. The total number of the Greek force was about 7,000 men. Leonidas knew that the chances of survival were slim. An oracle predicted that either Sparta would be destroyed, or its king would perish. Leonidas chose to take only those Spartiates who had sons. He did not want to condemn families to extinction. The 300 warriors marched to certain death, but not one hesitated. For a Spartan, Death in battle for the fatherland was the highest honor. The Persian army approached Thermopylae. Xerxes was confident of a swift victory. He sent scouts, who reported that the Greeks were few in number and behaved strangely. Some were combing their hair, others were doing gymnastics. Xerxes laughed, but the Spartan defector, Leonidas, a former king, warned him, "These are Spartans. They are preparing for death. Before battle, they always tidy themselves up to look dignified. In your last hour, you will face the bravest warriors in the world." Xerxes waited for 4 days, hoping the Greeks would retreat. They did not retreat. Then he sent the Medes into attack. Waves of warriors crashed against the Greek phalanx. The narrow pass became a trap for the Persians. They could not deploy their formations, could not use their numbers. The Spartan phalanx stood like a wall, shields locked, spears pointed forward. The Persians ran into this wall and perished. The Medes retreated, having lost thousands of warriors. Xerxes sent in the immortals, the elite guard. The result was the same. The Greeks held. The battle lasted 2 days. Xerxes lost patience. The Persians suffered heavy losses, while the Greeks lost almost no men. The narrow pass turned into a meat grinder. Leonidas used tactical tricks. The Greeks pretended to retreat. The Persians rushed in pursuit and fell under attack. The Spartans killed their enemies methodically, without fury, as if in training. This was the work they knew best in the world, but treachery destroyed the plan. A local resident named Ephialtes, tempted by the promised reward, showed the Persians a mountain path that bypassed Thermopylae. Xerxes immediately sent a detachment led by the commander Hydarnes. At night, the Persians ascended the path. The Phocians guarding the pass were caught off guard and fled. The way for the encirclement of the Greeks was open. In the morning, Leonidas learned of the betrayal. Encirclement was inevitable. He ordered most of the army to retreat to preserve their strength for future battles. But he himself remained with the 300 Spartiates, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans. They knew they would die, but they had to hold back the Persians for at least another day, giving the other Greeks time to retreat. The last battle was fierce. The Greeks emerged from the narrow pass into open ground to inflict maximum losses on the Persians. They fought with spears until the spears broke, then with swords until the swords were blunted, then with their hands, teeth, and stones. Leonidas fell among the first. The Spartans repeatedly fought to retrieve his body from the Persians. Finally, the Greeks retreated to a hill. The Persians surrounded them and rained arrows upon them. Not a single Greek asked for quarter. They died standing. It is known that one Spartan, Aristodemus, did not participate in the final battle. He was ill with eye problems and was sent back with the main army. Returning to Sparta, Aristodemus faced contempt. He was called a coward, even though he was ill. No one spoke to him. No one gave him fire for his hearth. A year later, Aristodemus had the opportunity to atone for his shame. In the Battle of Plataea, he fought with insane fury, throwing himself into the thickest of the enemy. He died, but the Spartans did not recognize him as a hero. They said he sought death, not victory, and that this was not valor, but despair. Thermopylae became a symbol. The Greeks lost the battle, but gained something greater: faith in themselves. The Persians lost thousands of warriors, being delayed at the pass. A monument was erected at the site of the battle with an inscription by the poet Simonides: "Traveler, go tell our citizens in Lacedaemon that we lie here, obeying their laws." These words became an epitaph for all who died for freedom. The Persians continued their advance. They captured Athens and burned the Acropolis. It seemed Greece was doomed, but the Athenian fleet defeated the Persians at Salamis. Xerxes, having lost naval supremacy, returned to Asia, leaving a large army in Greece under the command of Mardonius. The following summer, a united Greek army met the Persians at Plataea in Boeotia. Sparta fielded 5,000 Spartiates and 35,000 helots. The commander was the Spartan regent Pausanias. The Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE was a triumph of Spartan arms. The Persian cavalry attacked the Greeks but could not break the phalanx. When the Persians launched a general offensive, the Spartans withstood the first blow and counterattacked. Their discipline and training were fully demonstrated. Mardonius fell in battle. The Persian army fled. Greece was saved. Sparta covered itself with glory. Pausanias became a hero of all Hellas, but the victory had a dark side. Pausanias, drunk with glory, began to behave like an Eastern despot. He wore Persian clothing, surrounded himself with luxury, and treated allies cruelly. The Spartans summoned him home and tried him for betraying traditions. Pausanias was acquitted, but his reputation was ruined. Later, he was accused of conspiring with the Persians. Pausanias took refuge in the temple of Athena. The ephors ordered the doors to be sealed. Pausanias died of starvation in the sacred place, becoming a symbol of how glory can ruin even the greatest hero. After the Persian Wars, Sparta could have become the hegemon of all Greece. Its military authority was indisputable. But the Spartans refused active foreign policy. They feared leaving Laconia for long. The helots might revolt. The initiative was seized by Athens. They created the Delian League, uniting the polis of the Aegean Sea. The Athenian fleet protected trade, expelled Persians from the islands, and spread democracy. Athens grew rich, built magnificent temples, and developed art and philosophy. Sparta remained a military camp, frozen in its ancient customs. The confrontation between Sparta and Athens was inevitable. They were two opposite worlds. Athens embodied democracy, trade, culture, and the pursuit of the new. Sparta personified oligarchy, military discipline, tradition, and disdain for change. The Athenians built a fleet. The Spartans trained the phalanx. The Athenians traded throughout the Mediterranean. Spartans prohibited the use of gold. Athenians created philosophical schools. Spartans considered philosophy useless chatter. Two such different polis could not coexist peacefully in the same Greek world. Tension grew for decades. The Delian League transformed into an Athenian maritime empire. Athens demanded tribute from its allies, suppressed attempts to leave the league, and intervened in the internal affairs of other polis. Many Greek cities turned to Sparta asking for protection from Athenian arbitrariness. Sparta hesitated. The ephors understood that a war with Athens would be long and difficult. The Spartan army was invincible on land, but Athens commanded the sea. How to fight an enemy who could avoid battle, sheltering behind walls and receiving provisions by sea. In 431 BCE, the conflict erupted. The cause was disputes over Corinth, an ally of Sparta, and Corcyra, an ally of Athens. Diplomatic negotiations failed. The Spartan Popular Assembly voted for war. King Archidamus, an old and experienced commander, tried to dissuade his countrymen. He pointed out that Sparta had no navy, no money for a long war, and no allies beyond the Peloponnese. But the young Spartiates craved glory. The ephor Pleistoanax gave a short speech. The Athenians have broken the peace. Let those for war cross to this side. The vast majority crossed. The Peloponnesian War began, which would last 27 years and devastate Greece. Sparta's strategy was simple: invade Attica, devastate the fields, and force Athens into a decisive battle. Archidamus led the army to Athens, but the Athenian strategist Pericles employed an unexpected tactic. He ordered all rural inhabitants of Attica to shelter behind the long walls connecting Athens to the port of Piraeus. The Spartans devastated the fields, burned olive groves, but the Athenians did not come out to fight. They received provisions by sea. Their fleet carried out raids on the coast of the Peloponnese. The Spartans could not take Athens by storm. After a few weeks, having exhausted their provisions, they retreated. This tactic was repeated for several years. The Spartans invaded Attica, devastated it, and retreated. The Athenians endured, hoping to wear down the enemy. But the overcrowding of the population behind the walls led to disaster. In 429 BCE, plague broke out in Athens. The disease decimated people by the thousands. Pericles himself, the greatest leader of Athens, died. The plague lasted several years, claiming a third of the city's population. The Spartans avoided the epidemic. Their army was in the field, far from infected areas. The war continued with varying success. In 425 BCE, the Athenians achieved a major victory at Pylos. They captured a group of Spartiates on the island of Sphacteria and took them prisoner. This was a terrible blow to Sparta's prestige. Spartans did not surrender. They died, but did not disgrace themselves. The capture of living Spartiates shocked all of Greece. Sparta offered peace, but Athens refused, demanding impossible conditions. The Spartans changed their strategy. The commander Brasidas led a detachment north to Chalcidice, where important allies of Athens were located. Brasidas was an unusual Spartan. He possessed not only bravery but also eloquence and the ability to persuade. He promised cities freedom from Athenian oppression and respect for their autonomy. Many polias sided with Sparta. Athens sent an army led by the commander Cleon. In 422 BCE, the Battle of Amphipolis took place. Brasidas defeated the Athenians but fell in battle. Cleon also perished. Both sides lost their most warlike leaders. This opened the way for negotiations. In 421 BCE, the Peace of Nicias was concluded. Named after the Athenian strategist, Nicias, the terms were compromise. The parties exchanged prisoners and captured territories. The peace was supposed to last 50 years, but it lasted only 6. Both sides violated the agreements, supporting hostile factions. Distrust was too deep. In 415 BCE, Athens undertook an adventurous expedition to Sicily, seeking to capture the rich city of Syracuse. Syracuse appealed to Sparta for help. The Spartan commander Gylippus sailed to Sicily with a small detachment. His arrival turned the tide of the siege. The Athenian expedition ended in disaster. Tens of thousands of Athenians perished or were captured. The Athenian fleet was destroyed. This was the greatest military catastrophe in Athenian history. Sparta resumed the war. This time, it had a new ally, Persia. The Persian king agreed to finance the construction of a Spartan fleet in exchange for a promise to return the Greek cities of Asia Minor. This was a cynical alliance. Sparta, which had defended Greece from the Persians 80 years earlier, now sold Greeks to the Persian king for victory over Athens. The command of the Spartan fleet was taken by the outstanding commander Lysander. He was not of royal lineage, which was unusual for Sparta, where supreme command traditionally belonged to kings, but Lysander possessed strategic and diplomatic talent. He established close relations with the Persian prince Cyrus, receiving generous funding from him. Lysander reformed the Spartan fleet, recruited experienced sailors, and trained crews. For the first time in history, Sparta became a naval power. In 405 BCE, Lysander defeated the Athenian fleet at Agoge. Athens lost its last ships and the ability to receive provisions by sea. Sparta blockaded the city from land and sea. Famine began. The Athenians held out for several months, hoping for a miracle. The miracle did not happen. In the spring of 404 BCE, Athens capitulated. Victory in the Peloponnesian War made Sparta the hegemon of all Greece. Lysander dictated the terms of peace. Athens had to destroy its long walls, surrender its fleet, except for 12 ships, and dissolve the Delian League. Democracy in Athens was overthrown. Power passed to an oligarchic government of 30 tyrants, installed by Sparta. Many polias, freed from Athenian rule, now submitted to Sparta. Spartan harmosts, military governors, were stationed in dozens of cities. Sparta reached the peak of its power, but the triumph was short-lived. Sparta was magnificent in war, but unskilled in governing in peacetime. Spartan harmosts behaved like conquerors, not liberators. They plundered allies, executed the undesirable, and supported brutal oligarchies. Cities that rejoiced at the fall of Athens now hated Sparta. In Athens itself, the 30 tyrants unleashed terror, executing thousands of citizens. A year later, Athenian democrats revolted, overthrew the tyrants, and restored democracy. Sparta could not prevent this. Lysander, the hero of the war, fell into disfavor. His ambitions and connections with the Persians aroused suspicion among the ephors. The Spartan system did not tolerate outstanding individuals. Lysander was removed from command. Power returned to King Agesilaus II, one of Sparta's most talented rulers. Agesilaus was lame, short, and unassuming, but he possessed a sharp mind, personal bravery, and unwavering devotion to Sparta. Agesilaus led a war against Persia in Asia Minor. He won victories, liberated Greek cities, and accumulated spoils. It seemed Sparta was about to avenge ancient grievances against Persia, but the Persian king used a more effective weapon: gold. Persian diplomats began to bribe politicians in Thebes, Corinth, and Athens, inciting them against Sparta. In 395 BCE, the Corinthian War broke out. A coalition of Greek polias rose against Sparta, and Agesilaus was forced to return from Asia to defend his homeland. In the Battle of Coronea in 394 BCE, Agesilaus defeated the coalition, but the war continued. Sparta fought on several fronts simultaneously. Its resources were limited. The number of full citizens was decreasing. Warriors thinned their ranks, and strict laws prevented replenishment. He who lost his kleros and could not pay his contributions to the syssitia lost his citizenship. By the beginning of the 4th century BCE, there were fewer than 3,000 full citizens left in Sparta. Once there were 9,000. The elite was shrinking, while the helots multiplied. In 387 BCE, Sparta committed an act that forever tarnished its reputation. Persia demanded an end to the war in Greece. The Peace of Antalcidas, also known as the King's Peace, was concluded. According to its terms, the Greek cities of Asia Minor were handed over to Persia. Sparta, once the defender of Hellas against barbarians, betrayed its own kinsmen. It sold them to the Persian king in exchange for recognition of its hegemony in Greece. This shameful peace caused outrage throughout Hellas. Spartan hegemony was based on fear and force, not on respect. Cities hated the Spartan Harmosts. In 382 BCE, Sparta seized the Cadmea, the citadel of Thebes, treacherously violating the peace. This was an act of aggression that overflowed the cup of patience. The Theban patriots, led by Pelopidas, expelled the Spartan garrison. Thebes embarked on a path of open confrontation with Sparta. Thebes found a brilliant commander, Epaminondas. He created a new tactic, opposing the Spartan phalanx with a strengthened left wing, built in a depth of 10 ranks. In 371 BCE, at Leuctra, a battle took place that changed the history of Greece. Epaminondas defeated the Spartan army. King Cleombrotus and 700 Spartiates, almost a quarter of all full citizens, perished. This was the first major defeat for Sparta in a field battle in several centuries. Epaminondas did not stop. He invaded Laconia, something no enemy had done for 400 years. The Theban army marched through the Eurotas Valley, devastating Spartan lands, but the worst blow was yet to come. Epaminondas liberated Messenia. He founded the city of Messene as the capital of a free Messenian state. The helots, who had been in slavery for centuries, gained freedom. They took up arms to defend it. Sparta lost half of its lands and most of its helots. The economic base of the system collapsed. Sparta tried to reclaim Messenia but could not. Epaminondas invaded Laconia again in 362 BCE. In the Battle of Mantinea, he defeated the Spartans, but he himself died in the heat of battle. His death saved Sparta from complete annihilation, but Spartan hegemony had ended. Thebes became the new power in Greece, but its rule was also short-lived. Greece was exhausted by endless wars. The polis ruined each other, killed their best citizens, and wasted resources. A new power was rising. In the north, Macedon was strengthening under King Philip II. The Macedonians were Greeks in language and culture, but their monarchy and disciplined army resembled Eastern kingdoms. Philip conquered Greece city by city, using diplomacy, bribery, and force. Sparta refused to submit to Macedon. When Philip conquered most of Greece and defeated the united army of Athens and Thebes at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, Sparta did not participate in the battle. After his victory, Philip invaded Laconia, devastated the outskirts, but did not besiege Sparta itself. He sent a message to the Spartans. "If I enter Laconia, I will raze Sparta to the ground." The Spartan ephors replied with a single word, "If." This laconicism became legendary. Philip did not waste time on a siege of an undefended city inhabited by fanatical warriors. Sparta retained formal independence. After Philip's death, his son Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and reached India. Sparta did not participate in these campaigns. When Alexander sent Persian trophies to Greece with the inscription, "From Alexander and the Hellenes, except Lacedaemon," the Spartans remained silent. They did not recognize Macedonian rule, but they also lacked the strength to openly resist it. King Agis II attempted to revolt against the Macedonian regent Antipater in 331 BCE. He gathered an army of allies but was defeated at Megalopolis. Agis died heroically, fighting surrounded by enemies. His death was the last burst of Spartan military glory. Sparta was forced to recognize Macedonian rule. Inside Sparta, a crisis was deepening. The number of full citizens continued to decline. By the mid-2nd century BCE, There were fewer than 700 Spartiates left. Land was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy individuals. Most citizens became impoverished. The ancient laws of Lycurgus were forgotten. Luxury had infiltrated Sparta. Corruption ate away at the system. The inequality that Lycurgus had sought to eradicate returned with doubled force. In 244 BCE, King Agis IV came to power. He attempted to carry out radical reforms, abolish debts, redistribute land, restore the ancient agoge, and increase the number of citizens by including perioikoi. Agis was an idealist who believed that a return to Lycurgus's laws would save Sparta, but the wealthy elite resisted the reforms. The ephors, bribed by the rich, arrested Agis and executed him. This was an unprecedented crime. Spartans had never before executed their kings. 9 years later, Cleomenes III came to power, Agis's nephew. He continued the reforms but acted more ruthlessly. Cleomenes carried out a coup, abolished the College of Ephors, exiled opponents, redistributed land, and increased the number of citizens. He restored the agoge and Syssitia. Under his rule, Sparta briefly regained its military might. Cleomenes conquered most of the Peloponnese, threatening Macedon, but the Macedonian king Antigonus II could not allow Sparta to strengthen. In 222 BCE, he invaded the Peloponnese with a huge army. In the Battle of Silesia, the Macedonian phalanx defeated the Spartans. Cleomenes fled to Egypt, where he later died. Antigonus entered Sparta. For the first time in its history, an enemy army occupied the city. The Macedonians destroyed the city fortifications, restored the ephors, and abolished Cleomenes' reforms. Sparta became an obedient ally of Macedon. In the late 2nd century BCE, a new power appeared in Greece, Rome. The Romans gradually conquered the Hellenistic world. Sparta tried to balance between warring factions, but increasingly became a pawn in others' games. In 192 BCE, the tyrant Nabis came to power in Sparta. He carried out a social revolution, freed the helots, armed them, and granted them citizenship. Nabis turned Sparta into a base for pirates and bandits. He plundered his neighbors, captured slaves, and terrorized the Peloponnese. Rome decided to put an end to Nabis. The Roman commander Titus Quinctius Flamininus besieged Sparta and forced Nabis to surrender. Later, Nabis was killed by Italians. Sparta joined the Achaean League, now controlled by Rome. The Spartans repeatedly rebelled against the Achaeans, but each time were suppressed. In 146 BCE, Rome finally conquered Greece. Sparta became part of the Roman province of Achaea. Under Roman rule, Sparta transformed into a peculiar museum. The Romans admired Spartan history and the myth of Lycurgus. They restored ancient customs, turning them into theatrical performances for tourists. The agoge became an attraction. Youths were publicly whipped at the altar of Artemis, and Roman spectators watched this as a spectacle. Sparta lived off the glory of its past, selling memories of its former greatness. In the 2nd century CE, the Goths plundered Sparta. The city never recovered from this blow. The population decreased. Many buildings fell into disrepair. With the adoption of Christianity, pagan cults were forbidden. Ancient temples were destroyed. The Byzantines renamed Sparta to Lacedaemon. The old name was almost forgotten. In the Middle Ages, a small settlement existed on the site of ancient Sparta. The Slavs who came to the Peloponnese mixed with the remnants of the Greek population. In the 10th century, the Frankish crusaders built the castle of Mistras there, which overshadowed the ancient city. Sparta became a village. Only in the 19th century, after Greece gained independence, did the authorities decide to restore Sparta as a symbol of the Hellenic spirit. In 1834, the modern city of Sparta was founded near the ancient ruins. Archaeologists began excavations but found little. The Spartans did not build with stone. They erected no monuments. Little remained of the great city, only meager foundations and broken inscriptions. The history of Sparta is a story of greatness and tragedy. The Spartans created a unique system that transformed people into perfect warriors, but this system was inflexible, cruel, and doomed to self-destruction. Sparta could not adapt. It could not change. It froze in its ancient customs and perished when the world around it changed. The Spartans disdained wealth, but grew poor. They praised equality, but created cruel inequality between citizens and helots. They sang of freedom, but built a society of total control. They strove for immortal glory, and indeed achieved it, but at a price that is difficult to justify. Sparta remains in history as a symbol of military valor, discipline, and self-sacrifice. Its warriors inspire people thousands of years later, but it also remains a warning that a society that subordinates everything to one goal is doomed to stagnation and ruin. The greatness of Sparta was real, but its tragedy was also inevitable.